Hi, I'm Maya from Book and Dreams and welcome to a new video. As you can probably hear, I'm still a bit under the weather, but we'll just power through. So in this video, I'll talk about my April reading wrap-up. First, let's do some stats. So in April, I read 15 books. 5 of them were science fiction, 9 were fantasy, and 1 was a crime thriller book. Of those 15 books, 8 were audiobooks, 3 were physical, and 4 were ebooks. First, I'll talk about all the stuff that I've read for the Orilium readathon. Now, I was successful in this readathon. There were some changes in the TBR along the way, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that my character has finished this semester of schooling and it's on their way to become a scribe / craftsmage. Let's go through the books I had to read for the scribe calling. So for elemental studies in my TBR, I had Jasmine Throne. Now, I didn't get to it. Replaced that book with The Tea Dragon Society by Kay O'Neill. So The Tea Dragon Society is a children's book. It's a fantasy story about a group of characters who take care of cute little tea dragons. Dragons that basically grow tea leaves on their horns and such. So, you have a chamomile one and you have like other different kinds of teas. And so you follow, a bunch of children characters trying to figure out, how to take care of dragons, and you sort of learn the history of these dragons and of the previous Tea Dragon Society as you go on reading the books. It was really cute. I enjoyed it. Then for Inscription, I read Blacklands by Belinda Bauer. I gave the book back, so I have nothing to show you here physically. So this is a crime story about a little boy who is suffering in his family. Is a bit much to say, but basically his grandmother is very mean towards his mother and towards him and his brother because she has lost her son, who was killed by a serial killer, and his body was never found. So in his mind, he thinks that if he can find the body of this son, that grandma will be nicer to everyone and it will improve his life and the life of his mother, who throughout the book has this on and off relationship with this dude. So he writes a letter to the serial killer, and the serial killer takes this opportunity to start like a mind game with him. This is a book in a genre that I don't usually read, so I didn't really rate it on Goodreads. It was tense in moments, and I don't really like reading about serial killers and people who harm children, and it was tense. I don't want to spoil it for people. But yeah, it was a quick read. I read it in one day. So yeah, I read a crime story. For spells and incantations, I read This Savage Song by V.E. Schwab. Now, this is a book from 2016, and this is like the height of YA fantasy. And this is really good. I really enjoyed it. So in this book, we follow 2 characters. One is Kate, who is like the edgelord character of this story. She's like, she's a teenager who is doing. At the beginning of the book, she basically sets her school's church on fire, so she can be sent back home to this city where her father is like the ruler. He's the ruler, right? People pay him for protection and whatnot. So she wants to go back to this city to sort of, I guess, prove her worth. And we also follow August, who is a creation of this world. So in this world, when there's a horrible crime that happens, there are 3 types of monsters that just appear. And August is one type of this monster that can basically judge all the other monsters by like his musical talent. So his musical talent is he plays the violin. So he goes around playing the violin to help. He's trying to help his family, to protect their part of the city, but his family is very overprotective of him. August is actually being sent by his family to spy on Kate in this new school, and he's like supposed to get near her and sort of gather information because the truce that there is between their 2 families is slowly falling apart. I really had a fun time reading this. The audiobook is really good. This actually made me want to go back and read The Darker Shade of Magic because there's a point of time that I stopped reading V. Schwab books. I've bought this really a long time ago. It's been on my TBR for a little while, and I'm really glad I got to it because it's really good. I really enjoyed V.E. Schwab's writing, and the characters weren't annoying. When you're older, sometimes following teenage characters can be really, really frustrating. But this was a really, really fun read, and I'm looking forward to getting to the sequel. Another plus for this book that there wasn't any romance. The attention was on the plot between these two teenagers trying to figure out how to stop the war that is about to start again between their two families, and them working together and learning about each other, and unlearning what they have been taught by their family, and basically figuring out who your family is, and who you can trust and not. It was a really interesting read. For the class restoration, I read Lessons Never Learned by Rob J. Hayes. This is book 2 in the Internal War series. This is the sequel to a really awesome book called Along the Razor's Edge. Now, I say it's awesome because the second one is not awesome. So the first book deals with a teenage character getting out of a prison, so it's very contained, and the vibe is very specific. In the second book, as our main character got out of prison, she and the group of people that helped her escape are trying to find somewhere to lay low and to, I guess, get away from the overall, let's say, main conflict in their world. The problem with that is that there wasn't really a lot of overall world building in the first one, because we were contained in the prison. But in the second one, they went outside, and then you're just now inundated with so many information about the world, about conflicts, about gods, different types of gods, what they want to do, and our main character somehow is now part of some prophecy to stop this eternal war and whatnot. And just the problem was that the first third of the book is basically a slice of life story. We sort of just listen to all the shit that our main character goes through. I can't really tell you much because it will spoil some plot points from the first book, but it was really just so, I don't know. I don't want to say it was boring, but it was slowed down everything, because the main plot of this book starts at the 40% of the book, where our main character is sent on a mission to recover some artifact, and throughout this mission she learns more about her powers, and learns that she can do stuff that other people can't and whatnot. It has a completely different vibe from the first book, and it was just so it was a slog to get through. I gave it 2 stars, and I was so excited about this series. If you remember from the TBR, when I picked the book out from my sequel jar, I was so excited because I enjoyed the first one so much. But this one, it just kind of ruined the excitement of the series for me. I will read the third one, and I think that will be the one that I will, after reading it, decide whether I want to continue on with the series or not. And one of the things that is sort of disadvantage with this book, because the story is being told by the older version of our main character, so we know that she will survive every dangerous encounter she's a part of. I mean, we can just sort of wonder what kind of state she will be in, but when the main character is surrounded by so much plot armor, it makes the story not as interesting to read. And so, throughout I think I lost interest in the book in the last 100 pages, and I was like, oh, let's just get through this to see, the plot points, to see what happens, where our main character ends up at the end of the second book. But it was just, it wasn't really as fun as the first one. The last class I had to finish for the scribe calling is lore, and for that I read Half the World by Joe Abercrombie. This is book 2 in his Shattered Sea series. Now, I don't know why people say that this is for YA readers. This is grim, dark fantasy, but a lighter version of that. I mean, our characters are sort of teenagers, but the things that happen to them are so brutal. So this is a version of Vikings, in which we follow this one nation. And in this one nation, women are basically treated like shit. They have to prove themselves if they want to join the men in the boys, basically, in training to become warriors for this tribe, so they can go on raids and such. So at the beginning of the book, we follow our main character. Her name is Thorn, and we follow as she basically is finishing her training to in their war school. And she wins the final battle, and is technically supposed to be the winner. But since her teacher hates women, and hates her specifically, he basically sets her up to fight 3 boys at one time. And she is winning, and at one point through these fighting, she kills one of the boys, and because of that, she's sort of sentenced. She was sentenced to death, I believe. But the one of the boys she was fighting with sort of spoke up for her, on her behalf, and with that sort of sealed his fate, because he's like, the teacher was the one who picked people to go on raids and stuff, and he was like, I know what you did, and fuck you, and you're not joining us. But also sealed her fate by letting one of their like diplomats take her on this world-round journey around the Shattered Seat on a diplomatic mission. And basically, this diplomat guy is part of some priesthood thing, I don't know. And he's also the anti-Gandalf character in this story. If you've read the first Law trilogy, then you know what I'm talking about. He takes her and the boy on this journey. She learns how to fight, becomes this great warrior. They do horrible things are done to them. It's fucking grimdark fantasy. And it was an interesting read. My one complaint about this book is that sometimes the writing seemed a bit disjointed. Like it seemed like little vignettes, like the action would stop in the middle, and it was kind of weird. But overall I liked it, and I'm looking forward to the sequel. And then I had to read 3 books for Craftsmage. For Inscription, I picked Metastase. I started it and then DNF'd it after about 30 or 40 pages because it just wasn't a read for me. So this is a contemporary story about a group of friends who are in various stages of drug use. And this is not something that interests me. The language was a bit difficult to read because I don't want to say it's the way people speak right now, but it was just kind of brutal, and it was crude, but it was just so rough, and it wasn't something I was interested in reading at that time or ever. And I was like, okay, I don't really want to read this, and so I put it aside, and I read something else for that, and that is One Foot in the Fade by Luke Arnold. The prompt for this class was to read something that's on the top shelf of your bookshelf, and since my books are alphabetical in order, Arnold is A, so that was on my top shelf. So this is book 3 in the Fetch Phillips archive, in which we follow Fetch Phillips, who is a private detective and works basically only for the supernatural creatures of his world, because he was instrumental in destroying magic and making sure that all the supernatural creatures in his world suffer greatly. Throughout these books, we sort of find out how Fetch is easy to manipulate and how he is very eager to help, and in his eagerness, he doesn't stop and think about what is happening, what the motivation of the characters that he meets are, and there are some grave consequences to his action. Third one is just like that. I really enjoyed this series. I'm really hoping to hear some news about the sequel, because, the problem isn't solved. And I just want to see how this story continues. I really do enjoy this series. I'm now up to date to this. I read all the 3 books that are out. And yeah, this is an interesting urban fantasy series with a character that is flawed and fascinating to follow, just because you feel for him, but you're also frustrated by his actions and by how he doesn't seem to learn about what is happening. But it's not in a frustrating way, because his problems seems to come from like a different angle, and you're like, you should have been more suspicious of people, after the first book. But he isn't. He really just wants to help, and he wants to make sure that everything gets back to how it was in old days. And yeah, I really enjoyed this, and hopefully soon we will hear news about the sequel. Then for Artificery, I believe that was the class, I read The Imaginary Corpse by Taylor Hayes. This is also my book for the year-long thingy that's happening with Orilium. In this story, we follow Tippy the Triceratops as he is investigating the murder of the characters in his imaginary world. So basically, in this story, whenever someone has an idea for like a TV show, a toy, any kind of idea, children have, imaginary friends and whatnot. And if this idea is strong enough, it can existing in this imaginary world. This imaginary world has sections, and Tippy works in a section where, people come and live, and he's part of the welcoming committee, and he welcomes new ideas and whatnot, and helps them if they are in trouble, because he's a private detective. That was the idea that he was created with by his human. That is his job. So the story starts with him welcoming a new member into his part of this world, his town, and this new member is then murdered by another creation. The thing is that in this world, an idea can die, but it will be reborn. But in this instance, this idea was just murdered completely and erased from existence, and this is troubling for all the, ideas living in this world. So Tippy is set on a course to figure out what is happening and as you read this book, the connections with the real world and how ideas come to be, and what influences your idea to appear and start existing, was very interesting to read. The thing is that some ideas are born out of trauma, some ideas are born from a happy instance, but then affected by something horrible that happened to the person whose idea it was. And there is some children trauma thing that is happening in this story. What I really enjoyed about this book is how Tippy dealt with everyone he met. He was very, I don't want to say sensitive, but very considerate of their feelings and of what their wants and needs. And he was always careful to explain things to people, and he was always careful to communicate with others he was working with and others he was helping. There was lots of communication with other characters, and whenever Tippy made a mistake, he always owned up to it, and he was always careful of others. It was a very interesting read, and I'm looking forward to the author's next books, because I will definitely give them a try. And definitely, if you've got the opportunity, read this. It is really, really good, very imaginative, and just fun. And for the last class for Crafts Mage, the class was Spells and Incantations, and for that I read Retribution Falls by Chris Wooding. This is book 1 in his The Adventures of Kitty J series. In this book we follow the crew of the Kitty J, I guess that's the ship here, as they go around trying to do stuff. So the book starts with our crew getting a job that of course was too good to be true, and they were framed the destruction and murder of, I think, royalty of a neighboring city or state or whatnot. So most of the book, our crew is on the run from the authorities, trying to figure out how to clear their name. Now, the thing is, I think this is a really, really good book for fans of Firefly, because you follow a crew of misfits as they, try to work together, and, you learn, as you go through the book, you learn more about the characters. Not all of them are likable, our captain included. But as the book goes, you sort of learn more about them, and you sort of see, what motivates them, and, you see them change, because several characters do have a very specific character arc that, they start as really, really the biggest assholes in the world and end up as, a bit of a less of an asshole, but, changed, and they see how their actions affect them and the people around them, and there are some things that they have to change. I really, really enjoyed this. This has a steampunk feel. It's really interesting, and I'm looking forward to the sequel. It was a really fun read. So those are all the books that I read for Orilium. I also read a bunch of other things, one of them being a sci-fi romance by Jessie McCallick. So I read the Rogue Queen series. This is The Queen's Gambit, The Queen's Advantage, and The Queen's Triumph. So basically in this trilogy, we follow the Rogue Queen, Samara. Now, she's the Rogue Queen because she governs a group of refugees, mostly, from this great war that is happening in the Empire. The thing is that with her people are mostly mercenaries. Because of that, they do have a bad reputation. Now, her people are in this horrible situation in which soon they will run out of food. So she comes up with a plan after her learning that the Emperor has been kidnapped, to kidnap the Emperor herself, rescue him, and ransom him back to his empire. And she does that. She finds Emperor Valentine and tries to ransom him, but Emperor Valentine has traitors in his midst and in his empire, so they were like, yeah, we'll give you more if you kill him. So the two of them basically work together to figure out this problem and to help each other and help their people. And throughout that, their romance blossoms and whatnot. There's a lot of political stuff happening. There's a lot of action. As the series goes, their relationship develops and whatnot. They do become a bit sappy in the third one. But yeah, it was a fun read, a very good palate cleanser between all the other books that I had to read. Then I also read The Curse of the Chalian by Louis McMaster Bujold. This is a book from my 2000-2023 reading challenge. This is the book for the year 2001 when this book was published, and this is a fantasy book in which we follow a former, well, he's a soldier, but he was also a son of a nobleman, and during the war he was sort of sold into slavery and suffered being a slave for the enemy, and that was done to sort of ruin his family and whatnot. So when he comes back to his kingdom, to his home, he becomes the private secretary to the half-sister of the, what's the dude called? The king of their kingdom, right? So everything is going fine until the half-sister is called back to court to participate in the court intrigues and whatnot, and that is sort of where our book starts. Now, the thing with this book is that, how do I say this? It is kind of vast, and the world building is very interesting. A lot of philosophical talks about gods and their intention. You can use sort of the power of a god to affect things happening. So, for example, the family that our main character is serving has a curse upon them, and he tries throughout the whole book to break this curse by doing specific things. And if you can, invoke the god's power to murder people, and that will also have consequences of their own. And throughout this book, our main character basically is in poor physical health because he asked this god for, death, to kill somebody and to save his charge. And it's just, it was sometimes a bit slow of a read, and also the audiobook was kind of iffy. I could hear the narrator acting, and that kind of always threw me out of the story. And I was like rolling my eyes and just like wondering why the narrator chose that way of reading a specific sentence or acting and whatnot. So yeah, overall the story ends quite well in the first book. So I'm not going to continue on with this series, but it was an okay read. It's a fantasy from the early aughts, and I've read better. And I also read 3 novellas for the Christinelli Awards. I read Ogres by Adrian Tchaikovsky, which I really, really enjoyed. I can't tell you anything because it will be spoilers. Just to say that we follow, this is a novella set in a world where ogres are sort of the masters of humans. And throughout the story, we find out how that happened, and there were and the consequences of the humans sort of rising up. It was a really, really well done novella, and I really enjoyed it. Then I read Servant Mage by Kate Elliott. Now my issue with this novella, it was an epic fantasy shoved and crammed into a little novella, and the main character we follow is sort of learning about her powers, and she starts as a servant, a slave to one people, to become sort of a slave to the other people, and who just keep trying to convince her that they are better masters, I guess, than the previous ones. But yeah, it was a lot of things happening in a short amount of time, and I just wasn't interested at all at anything that was happening. It didn't grip me and whatnot. So and I also read Comeuppance Served Cold. I really, really enjoyed this. We follow characters who are taking revenge on one of the, I guess, ruling families of this world. And the way they get revenge is by using magic. And it was a really, really interesting read. I had a fun time reading it, and it went by quite quickly. So those are all the books that I've read in April. If you have read any of them and you want to share your thoughts, please do so down below in the comments. If you like this video, please press the like button. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. March wrap-up will be coming soon. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!